invite you to the session, Language Literature for Proficiencies of Pre-Law Students, Curricular and Pedagogical Perspectives. I hope this will be a very fruitful session for the students. We have with us Professor Hema Ramanathan, and we are delighted to have her with us as part of this conference because the much needed language route to this whole question of law and law language literature. She's the one who is going to take us through that pathway. Dr. Hema Ramanathan is an associate professor at the University of West Georgia. She believes that education is a public discipline, teaching a social act, and research in education should mirror these concepts. She taught English language and literature in India, Indonesia, and Malaysia, specialized in teacher education, including diversity, pedagogy, and curriculum for almost 25 years in the US. So we have a person who has such richness of experience in teaching and pedagogy design with us. She's presently a consultant with educational organizations in India, focusing on teacher professional development and English language teaching. She has to her credit 150 presentations and workshops and over 120 publications, including editing and co-authoring Weavers and English textbook series. Thank you, Dr. Hema Ramanathan, for accepting our invitation. We are happy to welcome you to this conference. We may now start the session, and my students are eagerly waiting to listening to you.
A couple of things. First, Professor Purvi, hi, thank you for thinking of me.
Good to see you after a long time.
I know, and it's almost been over 2 years now.
Yes.
But with the 1 year of COVID, I guess we haven't seen anybody.
Yes.
So, yeah. And thank you, Dr. Beanie, for answering all my questions and being that patient. The second thing, I'm not going to do the admin work here of admitting students if somebody should go in and out. So I'm hoping that somebody else will do that so that I can focus on the presentation. The third thing, which I think I've seen happen in the other sessions, that I'm hoping will happen with this session too, if you could all, any questions there may be, send it to either Professor Beanie or to
Send the questions to
Nirmala. Yeah. And we can take them at the end, whatever question there may be. I may use some terms that you I'll try and keep off jargon, because I think we need to get to the meat of what we're going to talk about. But if there are terms that you are not sure of, if I'm using them in ways that are not very clear to you, ask for explanations. Like many of you here, I'm a teacher and a learner. And I think at this point, I've been a teacher long enough to know that there are always questions about, whoa, what are you talking about? So please feel free to ask questions. And if it's something that you need to ask right away, get to Professor Beanie, and I'm sure she'll be able to ask me the question at the right time. Okay. I've been listening to the sessions for the past couple of days, primarily to know the kinds of things that have been discussed. I know that we're talking about language, literature, and law here, and there's been a lot of talk about law. There's been even more talk about literature. There's been some talk about language. So I'm going to walk through some of the things that you're all, most of you as students are probably familiar with. I'm going to remind you of certain things that you may not want to remember, but I'm hoping that you'll go with me on that. The focus of my presentation really is looking at the experiences with literature and especially language that students of law come into. So I'm looking at freshman law, the first semester, the first year of law, that you come into the law program, and the experiences you've had as K12 students and what you bring into that. So then we can start discussing what the gaps are, what the students would like to know about language of law to be successful as law students, and what strengths and what knowledge they bring into the law program as having studied English for 6 to 12 years or 16 years, if we begin with the kindergarten. Some of it may be some things that you already know, in which case, please bear with me. Okay? Do we have any questions before we begin? Anything that you would like me to talk about? Ask.
No, you may go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm really going to talk about reading and writing, primarily because that is, I think, what we are looking at for the most part in law. It is necessary for a lawyer to do a lot more speaking and maybe some listening. But I haven't seen anybody really talk about the listening aspect of being a lawyer or learning law, which I find a little strange. If you don't listen to your clients, how would you know what to say and do? But maybe that's something that needs to be taken up at some other point of time. I've had some talk about speaking, but I haven't really heard talk about the speaking part of literature, which we find a lot in plays and in dialogues. And maybe that's something else that needs to be taken up. I'm not sure where in your program you address it and how you address it, but since it hasn't been brought up, I'm not going to bring it up except to mention it for now. So I want to go back and look at two aspects that I think you see as very important, which is reading and the writing. So let's look at first the topics, the legal topics or the topics related to law that might find a place in the K12 curriculum. Okay? Let's look at the reading, the texts that you will find, and what kind of texts that we have. Now, there is a difference between, say, the curriculum of CBSE and the states, and ICSE, IB, Cambridge. Those have very different curricula and very different texts that are used. Let's look at some of these. The NCF 2005, which still has a lot of impact on textbooks. Many of the textbooks that are in use now by NCERT and states are based on the National Curriculum Framework of 2005. It has two different themes that it proposes that are important, I think, especially when you relate to law. Neighborhood and community at large, because the legal, and I don't think I need to go further into that, and peace and harmony. So those are two themes which are definitely law related, which means that every grade level and every content area in the subject area, discipline, has topics related to these two themes. They may come in different forms, and we'll take a couple of examples of these. In English, for instance, we do talk about civic values and personal values. And when we talk about civic values, I know a lot of people have been mentioning social and economic categories and of people, and therefore the social justice that is inherent in those kinds of differences. We talk about nationalism or patriotism. Equality is something that when we talk about social justice, we talk about jurisprudence, we talk about the concept of justice in law, and the concept of justice in the legal system becomes very important. And of course, respecting others' rights, freedom, secularism, all of these are parts of what the legal system directly addresses, and it's inherent in how the legal system needs to look at these issues of society. When we talk about personal values, we talk about caring, cooperation, courage, fairness, honesty, integrity, loyalty, and so on. All of these, or some of these at least, are definitely addressed by content areas in English textbook. I mean, I'm an English major, so I know a lot more about the English curriculum than I do about any of the others. While the sciences may not be so integrally related to these values, social sciences are. History talks about that. Political science talks about these values, both civic and personal. So we do have at the K12 level these values that are addressed. And of course, social studies is to do with political science. Yes, we know that political science topics do talk about governance, especially at the middle school and high school level. But at the +2 level, it does talk about the larger issues in society. It talks about differences between people, differences in society. It talks about geographical differences. It covers a lot of issues that are integral to social justice. I wouldn't say the same of 15 years ago, before 20 years ago, before the new textbooks were written. But the NCRT books now, the social studies books, are extremely well written in terms of the coverage of issues that are important. Now, with the change in how the curriculum is implemented and with what parts of these curriculum will be implemented, we've been told that 50% of the content has to be cut. And the question, of course, is which 50%? And therefore, what are the civic and personal values that are lost? And that does become problematic. That does make things a little more open to contention. But we won't know that for another 2 or 3 months. So let's see. This is something that you will find in a lot of the first, second, third grade books where we talk about rules. And we tend to see civic behavior in terms of following the rules. This is a poem that talks about what you do and don't do on roads. A version of this is always found in some English textbook or the other in the first, second, or the third grade level. What does that mean? It means that students are introduced to the legal system as a series of laws that have to be followed. There's usually not an explanation of why the rules have to be followed. This is a slightly different poem because the last line in every verse just talk about why we need to do all of what we need to do. We can't walk on roads, traffic's and potholes, we can't drive on road. So we do talk about why we need to keep our roads dirty. But most of the time when we're introduced to laws and rules, we are told that's just it, just follow it. And I think that's something that we are taught in the K12 schools, to follow rules. You break a rule of the school, there are consequences to it. You hardly ever talk about why those rules are necessary and what those rules do to people if you don't follow them. And sometimes you don't follow the rules. For instance, what happens if you don't wear the right kind of shoes to school? You get pulled out, you get punished, you get fined. Hardly ever is a student asked why they didn't follow the rule, which is an important thing. So when we think of how rules are conceptualized in minds that are forming, and what they've been taught to think about rules, which is what to them the legal world is. We need to understand what your law students come into law with. What is their frame of reference where law is concerned? They come in with, they're encouraged to think about the legal system as a set of laws that must be maintained. And those rules and laws must be administered regardless. So, which might be something that you want to think about, because we all know that lawyers don't deal, and the law doesn't deal in black and white. Most of it is gray area. And the idea of what the legal system needs to do, and the people in the legal system need to do, is essentially help people understand what that gray area is. And I think I've heard at least 3 people refer to the gray area in different terms of interpretation. That's the first thing. Let's take a look at, this is another topic which in many ways we talk about laws. Schools have laws, which is what I said earlier. In this instance, however, it goes beyond just saying, well, these are the laws, but it talks about how the laws are related to citizenship, which is something that civic values and the civics curriculum teaches in the middle school. When we talk about the third arm, history, geography, the third arm of social science in the middle school, we talk about civic value. What is citizenship? And how does citizenship play out? And that is a large part of what builds into the political science in the 11th and 12th grade. Okay, a couple of caveats on this. One, political science is not something that everybody encounters in a high school because it is an elective, which means that only people who elect to take political science really talk about these issues in terms of the larger community and the larger society. It doesn't usually happen in the 9th and the 10th grades. That's not where political science curriculum is, nor are the teachers comfortable doing that for many reasons. But we do have examples like this where it can happen. Okay? If you have any questions about the curriculum so far or comments about it, please send them to Beanie and maybe we can take a couple of minutes to read them out after I've done with writing. That'll give you time to process what we've listened to so far, what you've listened to so far. Okay, let's talk about writing. There's a lot of writing that happens in the middle school and the high school. There's a lot of thinking about or doing writing that happens in the elementary school. But let's look at the middle and the high school writing, what really it is. Every exam in a middle and high school is a written exam. Every test is a written test. Most things that you get a grade on is written. Listening test with a 10% for each, it didn't really pan out very well. Schools have tried to do that, but they found a great problem with that. So most schools, 100% of what you get graded on, and therefore what students value in their classroom and in their school education is writing. It's not even the reading. Reading only contributes to the writing. If the reading doesn't lead to a writing activity or writing exercise, it doesn't have much value. Students don't read because they want to read. They read because they write to pass an exam. So when we talk about writing in law, and lawyers and judges have to do a lot of writing, they've had 12 years of being told that writing is important only if you're given a grade for it. And that's the only way you get assessed. Okay? Important to remember. Let's take a look at the genres of writing that they do. We have three major genres. We have the informational, the persuasive, and the narrative. Now, I'm going to leave you to decide eventually which of these you can use and how. The session 8. Session 8, there was a lot of talk about the narrative form of writing. Okay? I didn't hear much talk about the persuasive form of writing. But that genre is really important. But it probably comes out more in the oral skill and the oral format than the written format. When you talk about the legal system and how it works. When you argue in a court of law, that's what you're doing. But the other thing we need to remember is when you put together a file that gets submitted as evidence in the court, how you organize that file is also aimed at persuading the judge to look at the file and to understand the file in the way you want the judge to see that. It is subtle. You wouldn't dare do that, obviously. But that is one thing that should and will run and does run in a good lawyer's mind when the lawyer puts a file together. We all know that this happens when people leave things out either deliberately or by accident so that they don't want those pieces of evidence to be seen. That's persuading, right? That's persuading people to see the file the way you want it to be seen. The minute you put a really gory picture of Nirbhaya, which is the first thing that is seen in the file, right? If you put something like that together, that is persuading the reader, in this case the judge, into having a certain picture in the judge's mind, which is indelible in many ways. Pictures do speak 1,000 words, and they speak to us in 1,000 ways. So when you put a file together, and this is important for us to remember that writing is not just what goes down on paper. It's a way of thinking. Good writing gives you a format for thinking. And persuasive writing helps you see what you need to say and do to help the other person over to your side of thinking. We talk about debates. Debates happen in a school. It usually comes under the speech category. But that's what a debate is primarily supposed to do, right? Unfortunately, while Indian schools, and I need to tell you, the US schools, you ask teachers and students, have they ever seen a debate in a classroom? If you ask teachers, how many of them have conducted a debate in their entire lives in their classrooms? Maybe 10% of them, 5% of them. Debating is not a skill or an activity that's conducted in the US classrooms, K12 classrooms. Discussions are, but discussions are not debates, and we know the difference. In an Indian school, however, a debate is a formal activity that is conducted in a school, not necessarily in the classroom. Every English textbook, 6 through 12, definitely, will have at least one unit where there is an activity devoted suggesting a debate. The teacher may or may not conduct it, may choose to overlook that activity, but it is there. The people who draft the curriculum intend students to be familiar with the concept of a debate. Therefore, the concept of persuasive reading and writing and speaking, and the concept of persuasive ordering of the thoughts and of the points. So you definitely have that there. Posters, for instance, they expect you to come. So if I put a poster up, and one of the things we say is it needs to draw people in to help them look at the poster so that people want to come to that event. That's persuasive. It doesn't always happen in the words that are on the poster, but persuasion happens in the form of an illustration or the format, travel brochures. And one of the major things we say, as I've said before, is what persuades is illustrations. You draw people in with the illustrations, and then you talk to them using words to explain what you're really talking about, what the content is, and how much further they need to go into the content. I'm going to talk about informational next, and I'll come to the narrative last. A lot of what legal writing is seen as is information. We talk about what sections of the law, and we talk about what aspects of the law. We talk about what judgments. All of that is expected to give you information. And that is a large part of what legal writing, legal teaching works towards. Acquainting and familiarizing students with the informational aspect of the law. What happens in a K12 situation? Information is a large part, especially in the social sciences, where with history, we talk about dates, people, names. We don't do as, even when we do social history or military history, we still talk about details. It is still information. That information may be treated as trivia. Little details that really don't connect up with each other. So we have a lot of multiple choice questions where you just need to know the information, and it's remembering the information. Recalling of facts is how we treat information in K12. Okay? In math, we recall information and we are expected to apply it because we recall what the formula is, and then we're expected to apply that formula. So a lot of the information is still at the recall, at the memory stage. It might help some of us to go back and look at Bloom's taxonomy, and then we'll see that that's really at the lowest stage of how we should process information. Okay? These are some of the formats that we use to recall information. We talk about speeches where we say, give me a fact. What are we told when we write a speech? You need to have a quotation. That's to persuade people that what you're saying is more important than you actually think it is. Okay? But when we talk about speeches, we say, but the meat of what you say actually should be fact. Beginning in the 4th grade or the 5th grade, we make a difference we teach a difference between fact and opinion. And we think that's really important for people to know. We talk about information booklets, we talk biography, autobiographies. They're not seen as stories necessarily. We'll come to that, but biography is meant to tell you information that you didn't know. And that's the point of informational writing. It is supposed to tell you something you didn't know earlier. So if you tell somebody what they already know, you've wasted their time. So you always talk about what they didn't know. And that is information that you impart. And that's important information that you impart when you do informational writing. Okay, that's one. The second thing is that informational writing, we always say, has a flow to it, like persuasive writing has, and it's linear. that the way we write informational writing, you should almost be able to put it down in bullets. In fact, that's one of the processes, one of the steps of the process that we use. Put down bullet points, then rearrange the bullet point so that you can see an argument. But the details are what are important. So when you brainstorm, put the bullet points down. Then you do it linear. You should never, the informational thing should never say, well, go back to step 1 and take a look at when you're in step 5. Step 1 should, oh, sorry, what happened? Step 1 should always look at, should lead into step 2, which should lead into step 3, and so on. You never encircle it, go back to step 5 when you've already on step 7. That's a waste of everybody's time. So the linearity of thought is important in informational writing. So if legal studies are taught as informational, it would help us to go back and think about how much linearity do we really have and how much do we teach that. Let me talk about narrative and then I'll talk about the genres as a whole. Narrative, we've heard a lot about how literature should use a narrative form, and literature in its narrative form should be used in this multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary program that you're planning. When we look at the genres of the narrative style, the kinds of things that topics, genres we have, in the middle and high school, and I'm talking of general English right now, we use a lot of adventure, drama, some of fantasy, maybe definitely a legend. We have 5 poems. We have at least 1 autobiography. We don't usually use email as an input. We have a mystery. We have science fiction, which is usually clubbed with fantasy. We have biography and autobiography that are kind of clubbed together. We don't use fable in the house. We use what we think is funny. We're supposed to laugh, and they don't find it funny. Mythology and legend go together. Most of it is a short story. Sometimes we have extracts from larger pieces, but we hardly ever go back to the originals. Sometimes a lot of these larger pieces, the extracts, are rewritten as short stories. Jokes, fairy tales, a tall tale, comics, which are graphic novels. Graphic novels are used a lot more right now than they used to be 20 years ago. Tall tales, we usually have them in the primary school, but by the time they get to the high school, we don't usually use tall tales. Now let's look at what this means and how well students are connected with these forms and these genres. Most of what CBSE expects people to write, we all know this. 30 words, 100 words math, 150 words if you're lucky. That's all the writing that we do. Most of means that when you write these very short answers, there isn't the time to build an argument. Most of it becomes informational. You get to the point, you have keywords, you put those keywords in, and wasn't that what a minister said a couple of months ago? Just make sure you write something, anything, and you'll get grades. You'll get points on that. If you have the keywords, and as evaluators, we are told, if the keywords are not there, you can't give points. If the keywords are there, you have to give points, regardless of the language and any build-up of an argument there or a narrative. So when we talk about forms here, we talk, it becomes almost meaningless when we talk about the CBSE. And most of the law students who come in are probably from CBSE. If we look at those who come out of the ICSE/IB/Cambridge, they require a lot more writing. So they need to know how to write these different genres and what the features of the different genres are. So for many of you who come from different law schools around the country, when you talk about who your students are, it would be very helpful to know which board of examination they graduated from, because that might give you an idea of what literary ability they may have. Okay? All right. Any questions so far? Can I just go ahead?
No, no questions.
No, okay. Let's keep going. I'm probably overwhelming everybody right now. Okay, let's look at what we see of language in the K12 schools. I found this. This is a 1990 piece of writing, which is really to talk about how you write how you teach writing in a law program. I'm going to give you 1 minute to read it. Okay, does anybody think this is good writing? It makes no sense. There are too many words used, and we've no idea how the words are related to each other. Mark Twain, I think it was, who said, never use a $5 word when a 10-cent word will do. That's exactly it. These are $5 structures, and they don't mean anything. So if anybody teaches writing the way this expects you to teach writing and language there, nobody will ever learn writing. Okay. I'm going to talk about readability scores. I'm going back to reading. When we look at the text that we have, okay, when we look at the language of the text, not the content, not the theme, not the topic, but if we look at the language level of the texts, I did a quick review of the India Law Journal, ILI, and I did a quick review of the 12th grade English language text and the political science political English, of course, I didn't do the Hindi or any other language, the English version of the political science textbooks of NCERT. What we mean by readability score really is what the 11 to 16 or 13 to 16 mean is that the difficulty level of the text, of the language of that piece, is that it can be read and understood by people who are in the 11th to 16th grade. The India Law Journal looks at the 13th to 16th grade. So it looks at undergrads. Whereas the NCERT looks, depending on which text you're looking at, which content you're looking at, it goes from 8 to 16. It's actually the literature part of it, which is at the 16th grade level. The political science language readability score is at the 11th grade level, where complexity of sentence is concerned, they're about equal. 16 to 25, 18 to 27, about equal. The average syllable per word, about the same. So is the 3-syllabic words, which means that you don't have too many big words, right? You don't, which is good, which makes it easier to read. So we should be grateful for this, right? Very happy that what the law expects you to teach as faculty is graduate from NCRT, having studied NCRT books, should be able to do, right? No. Because what I gave you last was with the electives. 11th and 12th grade, those who elect to do literature and political science, which all of us know is much fewer than those who do the sciences. Okay, that's point one. Let's look at the core English level. And you see the difference? Everything gets scaled down. So everybody who goes through an 11th and 12th grade NCERT text, and most of them would have done only the core English, come into law totally unprepared to read the kind of things that law expects them to read. They're not used to reading long texts. The average of their text is about half of what the law journal says, and most textbooks run much longer than that. Chapters in a text are not short, right? So the texts are at the 6th grade level, whereas in a law, they're at the 13th grade level. So you have this huge gap. Who's going to fill that gap? How can you fill that gap? What can you do to fill that gap? And the you is not just the faculty. The you is also the students. You is also the people who write the curriculum for law classes. And this should be a major problem in the first year of law. A lot of the NLSUs now, and they've proliferated around the country, and they're oversubscribed, all of us know, they all have those who come in straight from the 12th grade. And the last column is what many of them come in with. Not all of them, many of them come in with. So let's look at what the implications of all of that are. One, you need to be sure that is gradually increasing in complexity. Two, you need to be sure that the language is simplified. There is a difference between the content and the language. And we need to be aware of that all the time. Okay? Sorry, I'm just trying to keep tabs on time. Okay. I have another half an hour or so to go. Okay. Let's look at some language items that become problematic. I'm just throwing ideas out right now. I'll leave you to process them and come back, hopefully, either now or a little later, for us to have a discussion about all of this. Students, when we talk about grammar, and there's a lot of grammar teaching that happens in K12, every English teacher wants to learn how to teach grammar. Anytime I offer a workshop to teachers, the first question is, will you have a workshop on grammar teaching? Everyone's worked up about that. Let's look at some of the things that we teach. Prepositions. There was somebody who at the, I think session 8 said prepositions are important. Yes, they are. In legal terms, there is a huge difference between when you say by the date and until the date. Right? And you can have whole cases lost because somebody misinterpreted that. Or cases that come into court because somebody misinterpreted that. There is a difference between must and may. And we heard about a case that was just that, where a judge of a higher court said, well, they may be given, and the lower court didn't follow through on that order because the lower court judge said, well, it was a choice. I'm choosing not to. Did not understand the legal implication of may, right? Will, shall, must, may, these are interchangeably used. Will and shall indicate the future tense, so far as a K12 student is concerned. Must is, well, there's no choice. May, there is a choice. But in legal terminology and how these are used, they have very specific moods, times, and implications. So if we leave it to the students, if we as faculty leave it to the students to work out that there is a difference, they may never do that. Maybe this is something we need to teach. Let's look at phrasal verbs. Most of the phrasal verbs that are taught in the K12 have to do with, say, body parts. I mean, you talk about their idioms. Having an eye on, apple of one's eye. I'd give an arm and leg for that. They are not necessary. They're used in terms of for their literary value. They're not necessarily used for the specificity value that they bring to the writing. Whereas phrasal verbs in the legal language are very important. So to teach those phrasal verbs and to teach students the importance of those phrasal verbs, to din it into them is another point that needs to be made. So when we talk about teaching language, it's not just the flow of the language, but also the specificity of the language. Students need to be taught what is important in the language, not merely what the language is. I did a quick review of, with about 4 or 5 sites about what words are used in legal terminology. And I kind of worked out when we look at the vocabulary that we have in K12, most of them, many of them, these are all familiar words. I mean, we talk about innocent, incompetent. I'm not going to tell you how when competent. These are the unfamiliar words, right? So when we look at unfamiliar words, how do we actually teach the unfamiliar words? Do we teach them specifically? Do we teach them and say, well, this is who a litigant is. This is what larceny is. And this is how it is different from breaking and entering. Okay? These are words that need to be taught before they get into the law dealing with these terms. And that can be done. At least they don't really have preconception, so there's no confusion. It's just that the faculty need to teach these terms. Now look at these. These are words that the students will know. They won't know the legal implication of these words. Hearing, it's what I do with my ears. Overrule, that's a huge one. Most of the students will come to you with the idea that overrule is not what the judge does, but it is like oversight. We look over the rules. We review the rules. So if they don't understand the difference between how a judge uses overrule and how they think they use overrule as a model of oversight, which is also wrong, but we won't get into that, you have a problem. Okay? So if students come in knowing these things, but not really knowing them in the legal term, and you don't have a process by which you disabuse them of the previous learning and have them build a different concept related to these words, when students do their reading, the readings become more difficult for them. These are words that might add to the reading difficulty of students because it causes confusion. Now, this causes reading difficulty. These are the kinds of words that make the readability level much higher, right? But this is the kind of words that make understanding more difficult for the student. And I hope you understand the difference between how you need to deal with these two states of mind of the student. Okay? I'm going to do a quick review. Okay. I want to finish by about 5 o'clock so that it gives us a little more time. How much time do we have for the session? About 20 minutes?
The session is from 4 to 5 and 15 minutes for discussion, but we can
Yeah.
take
So I have about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll get through this quickly. Now let's look at how students actually learn, how teachers teach reading in K12 class. The ones that you see in green, these are the strategies that teachers use. We begin a class by saying, okay, look at the title of this story. Look at the picture in this. What do you think is happening in the story? We skim and we scan, go through it very quickly, either looking for a general idea or looking for what is the name of and where were they went, looking for specific information. We look at comprehension. You read a piece, so what do you understand by this? Why do you think he did that? We look for questioning. We hope students will ask questions based on that. We talk of synthesis. Synthesis summary are very commonly used when students write their 30 words or 100-word essays, right? And then we teach words, which is word cognition. There are 4 that we don't necessarily use. Those really good teachers use them, but they're not always used by the average teacher. So students may not necessarily have encountered these ways of processing reading, processing what they read. Okay? I just put this down to give us an understanding of what we actually do. So we have pre-reading, during the reading, and post-reading. The pre-reading is when we talk about prediction. Sometimes we teach certain vocabulary items that become important in the text, and most of that is focused on speaking. And during the reading, we have reading and speaking, and the post-reading is almost entirely writing. We do tell our teachers, as teacher educators, students should not write anything that they have not said before, that orality should come before writing. Doesn't always happen, but we try. So these are some things that we do, and certain things that we try in ways in which to get students to understand and process their reading. Using colored print, using italics and bullets, headings and different kinds of headings. A lot of these are to help them process the reading. Okay? Graphics, infographics. Okay? So we have illustrations. After listening to the sessions for the past 1.5 days, I thought, this is something we probably need to remind ourselves about. Those of you who teach in higher ed, Your students come in knowing that they want to go into law, right? So when we look at material that we need to talk about, that they need to be familiar with, giving them Life of Pi doesn't add anything to them. Many of them get turned off because they don't want that kind of fantasy. They are there to learn about law. So the material, the more directly connected it is to because they're goal-oriented, they're relevancy-oriented. If they don't see the relevance, they're not going to take it in. We need to, when we choose material and when we choose how to do that, how to teach that, they need to be shown respect, that they know what they've come in with. There are skills that they have. They're not tabula rasa. So we need to let them know why it is important, in what way it will help them think about that. A lot of what I heard about choosing material for literature is to give them a sense of the right and the wrong, to give them a sense of how to build a narrative and how to look at the nuances, how to be able to put themselves in the shoes of other people who are less fortunate, which is essentially true of a majority of the people who come into courts, all of which is necessary. But we also need to keep in mind that they need to be persuaded that those are topics that are relevant to them. They don't come into law believing that those issues are relevant to them. This concept that we have of social justice is not what they come into law with. If you want to build that and you want to make that a cornerstone of your program, you need to keep in mind what andragogy says about the adult learner. And your students are adult learners. They're not children. Okay. All right. Comments, questions? Can I close the...
No questions in the chat. Students, you may type the questions as a private message to me or in the comment chat if you have any queries. If you want to ask, you may do that.
I'm hoping there'll be some people who disagree with how I've portrayed language learning in the K12 and say that they've had a very different experience.
Priyam,
Yeah.
you may ask your question here.
No, you're muted still. I think, Bini, you need to give her permission to unmute.
Student, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening, ma'am. Actually, unfortunately, for some reason, I could not attend right from the beginning. I attended towards the end, and I was very keen on attending because these were inputs about pedagogy. So towards the end, what I got is that, you spoke about how in higher education, students are here to particularly or specifically, study a subject. And that probably, gave me a sense that we should not involve too much of the ideas of social justice or
No.
humanity. No. Okay. So, what is important is to be told to them. How it's relevant is to be told to them. But maybe then you can explain to me, because you said that they've already chosen the field. So when I do, I'm a professor of English in the School of Law, and I feel, and I've been teaching for the past 3-4 years now, stories in English literature from the purview of law, and try to make them as relevant as possible. But how to make it more specific for them, considering that they are in law, maybe you can shed some light on that. So, for example, I teach Merchant of Venice as well, the trial scene in Act 4. So that would be, an illustration for everyone.
Okay, the first thing I need to say is quality of mercy, junk it. Junk, that's speech. Students couldn't care less about it. They are not interested in that kind of language. So that is a kind of literature we shouldn't be using with them. We want them to be able to get past the language to what underlies that language. If you make the language a barrier, then it defeats your purpose. And for any of us to read Shakespeare, unless you really, like you and I, we've studied Shakespeare. So we find it, we can pick up Shakespeare and just read it. But most people haven't, and most people don't need to. So first of all, anything that you choose must be linguistically available to them, accessible to them. Because what you're looking for is the content and the emotion behind the content that underlies that content. 1. 2, when we talk about what is relevant to them, yes, they've come into the field of law. So giving them something that talks about about engineering, where the topic is about engineering. There may be a point of law. It may be about civil contracts, right? But if the point is about engineering, they can't get past that because to them, they don't see the relevance. Okay? Think about, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of, when we talk about White Mughal, for instance, or any of those history books that are written now, a lot of them are important for us to understand how humans interact with each other, right? But a lot of your students may not have studied sociology, psychology, or anthropology, and may not be interested, may think they're not interested in human interaction. So you need to find a text that talks about human interaction. Let's take Witness for the Prosecution, whether it's a film or the book. That is timeless in a way because the language is not very difficult to get at if you're talking about the short story, right? The characters are still very easy to understand because they aren't very different from what we see around us. Okay? So, but if you get back to look at what does it really mean when she is prepared to break the law, right? And perjure herself for her husband. What does that show about human interaction? And what does the strength of that love mean in a court of law? Which is akin to when you talk about family law. That's what family law rests on, right? Family law, the tussle is always between two parties that love their kids equally. That's what the basis of family law is. That's where the social justice aspect of family law involves. So if you're able to bring that out for them and make that kind of connection for them, because a lot of them will begin their practice in family law or in Patiala court of some kind or the other, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Giving them that kind of understanding and helping them understand the relevance to them would be really worthwhile.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Yeah, that could be disrupting in their understanding if it is not relatable. Some of the subjects are not relatable. Otherwise, how you mention it, relevance and context, very important. Thank you.
I have a question. It really fascinated me when you spoke about the gray area of interpreting the normative. And see, the problem here is when I ask my students to attempt an interpretation, despite having satisfactory linguistic skills, they know the black and white, but they don't know the complexities of ideas, and they can't really enter into that gray area of the normative. And that leads me to a concern that I have about my own discipline, English literature, where we have this great divide between language studies and literary studies, which has now leaped on into the bandwagon of critical theory and literary theory. And then, it's interdisciplinary. And we are dwellers of the gray area. We don't know the black and white. So, I mean, I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. So the concept intensive and language intensive, and then both limit us somewhere. One way of approaching the discipline makes us too literal, and the other way makes us too conceptual, and we take these problems to the class as well. And then, so I would like to know, what has it done to the discipline and us as teachers when there is this divide between ELT and then literary studies, and then one doesn't look at the other stream, one stream doesn't look at the other stream, and I'm someone who is in the critical theory bandwagon, very much into literary studies, and I haven't done much of ELT. Yeah, so now I teach both language and literature.
Okay. And when we talk about the gray area, and I need to say, I haven't studied law. I'm an ELT person. Like I said, I read a lot, and therefore I am. But I'm not in the critical theory bandwagon, primarily because that's not where my jobs led me. And that's not what I saw as necessary in the K12 level, which is a different point. I think one of the things we need to remember is that you cannot read literature without accessing the language. Literature is a matter of concept, it's a matter of emotions, it's a matter of ideas, it's a matter of grandeur. When you have heights and depths, it's a matter of humaneness and of humanity. Language is a process, it's a vehicle. But if we don't drive that vehicle right, then it doesn't matter how wonderful the literature is, it'll be a dead world. So I think if I were you, I'd get the language out of the way first before I get to the literature. So if you have a piece, if you have a piece like Portia's speech, do the language of it. And I don't mean take every word apart. There are different ways of teaching the language of that. One of the ways is to modernize it, modernize the language. We have quite a few court speeches that have happened now within the past 20 years. In English, in Hindi, in Tamil, we've had some really good ones. Bring those in and put them up against Portia. So begin somewhere else before you get to Portia, so that you're finished with the language of that. And then get to the nuance of what she actually says.
Right.
And the beauty of Portia, of course, is that that while arguing for one side, she seems to be arguing for Shylock. Right? And that is a duplicity of Portia, which of course most of us won't ever talk about, but that is the truth of it. And that is what they need to see, that you don't have to say everything up front and be confrontational about it. In fact, you're a lot more when you go under the radar, a lot more effective, I think. So I think if we were to begin with doing Portia, for instance, in semester 4, would be much, much better. Semester 4 or 6, if possible, would be so much better than doing it at semester 1 or 2. right? So grading the text may also be a different way that you approach the gray area, so that they understand that there are gray areas. They know there are gray areas because they are treading it all the time in their lives, whether it's with their parents or with schooling or with classes or whatever. There's always, I mean, is cheating wrong? Yeah, it's wrong, but would you copy from me? Well, I wouldn't copy, but if somebody does, I'm not going to give away. I'll keep my paper so that somebody else can see it, but I'm not going to copy. That's a gray area, right? They negotiate that all the time. From the time they were in the 4th or the 3rd grade, this is nothing new. So this concept of gray area is not new, but how we nuance it for them and how much deeper we want to take it for them, you do it slowly. And for a lot of you, if they come in from the 12th grade, remember that they're all about 18 or 19. And physiologically and psychologically, the frontal lobes haven't developed yet, which means that their ability to process information in a linear fashion is still developing, right? That has a lot of implication for how much they're able to argue and see the argument in these gray areas.
Yeah, we have a question from Harshita Srivastava. She asks, do you suggest that students from a certain board of education have an advantage over others? How should the others make up for that extra bit lost over the years?
Linguistically, you bet they do.
Yes.
Linguistically, there isn't a doubt that a majority of the students who've done ICSC, IB, or Cambridge find it much easier to negotiate longer texts and more complex language. No doubt about that. Which isn't to say that those who've done state or CBSE boards, some of them aren't, but by and large, yes. Primarily because they've not been asked to do that. They've not been trained in negotiating that language and that length of text. Can they be encouraged and taught? Yeah. They're not stupid. An ability to not negotiate longer text does not indicate stupidity. It just indicates that they've not had an opportunity to do that yet. And they can be taught how to. So do that. Take it from smaller text. Begin with short stories. Begin with extracts. When you begin with an extract, have them go back and read 2 other chapters in that extract, relevant chapters. There may be a chapter in the 3rd chapter, which is what you're extracting. Have them go back and look at chapter 22, where the follow-through is, and have them do it alone. Have a 10-minute discussion in the next session that you have. Right? So encourage them to do that and teach them how to do that. I would probably suggest maybe 3 or 4 sessions where you talk about reading strategies, have them practice those reading strategies, and make sure for about the first semester, you focus on that and bring that focus back every time that you begin that kind of reading. Okay? So remind them of these reading strategies. Help them do meta-analysis with these reading strategies. And teach them how to take notes. This is something that we do with freshmen in the US at universities. We have a 1-credit course where we teach them academic skills. We teach them how to read, we teach them how to write, we teach them how to make notes, we teach them different ways of making notes. I mean, how many of you really walk through school ever knowing how to use graphic organizers to take notes? How many of you actually now take notes using graphic organizers? Think about that. So that's one way. So maybe a 1-credit course right away as they come in, to encourage them to think in terms of reading and writing skills, a skill-based 1-credit course. Okay? Does that help? I'm sorry, I don't remember who, Harshita was that?
Harshita, yes.
Yeah.
She's a student.
I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you, Professor Hema, for giving us a comprehensive analysis of the major skills and the major literary and cognitive skills for pedagogy. And this is indeed a very valuable session for both students and teachers. So we meet you in the next session again, which is the
Another
plenary.
15 minutes.
It's at 5:30. So see you at 5:30. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening, all of you.